This week in Pure Reinvention.
We need to remember that common sense is not so common, but we need to use it in resolving differences.
Episode 112, Julie Owens, Case Manager, the Honorable Judge Gerald Rosen, Part 2.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention. We're here with our co-host, Amy Frankman. Amy, it's wonderful to see you again.
Thank you, Mike.
Amy, we have a really good podcast to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. I have to ask, Mike, why were you wearing the pink hat?
So we had a chance to talk to Julie Owens, who is the case manager for Judge Rosen, and we found a big personality in Julie. And Julie actually uses that pink hat. Now, for most people who have met me, they know I'm kind of this conservative button-down shirt kind of guy, so I'm not normally seen with a pink hat. But the pink hat was actually a wonderful prop that Julie uses for a very important subject that she goes around to business groups and talks about, and that is, Amy,
disagreeing without being disagreeable.
And it's a absolutely awesome message that when you listen to this podcast, you will be able to pick up very easily. So let's listen.
Have you enjoyed our Pure Reinvention podcast? Are you ready to begin your own Pure Reinvention journey? Join our next Starters Experience May 4 through 5 and May 24 through 25 in Detroit. Learn the 5 fundamentals in an engaging and interactive way. Contact us at purereinvention.com today.
We're here with Julie Owens, case manager to the Honorable Gerald E. Rosen, and an individual with a very interesting story. So we're going to talk about that. So before we start, let's talk about the 5 steps in the Pure Reinvention process. And Julie, which step do you closely associate yourself with?
Connect. I like to connect the dots. I like to bring people together, processes together to make it all come together.
She said with a big smile. You've got to see the big smile. Your superpower?
I am an insightful, discerning, tenacious, and humorous teacher.
That was like 4 superpowers all at once. So that whole recipe was what makes it work, right?
Yes.
Sometimes, though, even when we have those superpowers, we find ourselves in uncomfortable situations. Can you explain the situation most recently where you found yourself uncomfortable?
Well, to give it some context, I never finished college. And so I was invited by a friend to consider joining a professional organization. So when the organization called me, one of the questions was, what is your level of education? And I said, some college. And the person said, well, you're aware this is a professional organization. And it kind of deflated me because it's like, does a degree define who I am as a professional? Mm-hmm. And so I had to become my own cheerleader and not get knocked off my square, bring myself back together and let her know that I am a professional. I have 19 years at the United States District Court. I've won the Chiefs Award for my excellence in work. I won a mentoring award for the year for winning futures. So I am a professional and I don't need a piece of paper to validate it, and neither did Bill Gates.
There is a real lesson to be learned when we start talking about professionalism, when we talk about success, right? When we talk about what really matters. And I think we've gotten for way too long too wrapped up in how we've done it instead of focusing on what it really is.
Correct.
So I appreciate you saying that, because I think for a lot of times we've missed the importance of careers in vocational training. We've missed careers in which people make tremendous differences to the success of the business that they are participating in. And I think most people, even who went to college, would say most of the college work that they did really never did directly tie into the work that they're doing.
That's true, and I'm not discounting the value of an education at all.
But education, we should keep in mind, comes in a lot of different packages.
That is so true.
So let's, Julie, talk about, you were introduced to Pure Reinvention by Sonia Robinson.
Yes.
And she had heard your marvelous presentation at the ABWA meeting. Yes. And you had put together this concept called disagreeing without being disagreeable.
That's correct.
Tell me about that.
Well, it all came about. I was talking to some fellow colleagues about how I disagree with my boss. And they were like, you should do something about this. You should do a presentation. And so I didn't think anything of it. When the time came, they called out for presenters for an organization I belong in, Federal Court Clerks Association. I put it together, submitted it, and it was number one in my category. So it means that people out there really want to know, how can you disagree without being disagreeable, especially with your boss, and keep your job? And that's how it all came about.
So what is the core concept of disagreeing without being disagreeable?
Well, first of all, we need to remember that common sense is not so common, but we need to use it in resolving differences. We also have to remember that when we're having disagreements, that words are gifts and words are weapons. Words can protect us and words can help us. So we need to be conscious of how we're saying things and what we're saying.
So give us an example of how words can be a weapon.
Well, I mean, if we're having a disagreement and I say, well, you're a nitwit. You've hurt me. You've damaged our relationship. So how do we get past that? Because we're having a disagreement, but now I've put my emotion in it, one, and two, I've used my words to hurt you. So, but I can also say, we are disagreeing, and I think that's a great idea. Let's explore that some. So now I've uplifted you, and I've left the door open for us to try and work something out.
So as Mom would have said, use your words, and then you would say, use your words carefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm curious, for those people who got our Monday morning email, they would have noticed a picture with my new headwear. Why did you insist that I wear that?
I insisted that you wear it because, one, it matched my hair.
That is true. It does.
Two, in doing this presentation, I presented in a way of how to use tools to fix it when you're in a disagreement. And the hard hat, and I also use safety goggles, is that we have to start with respect and end with respect. Just like if we're working on a project, you don't go into a project with a wood saw and don't have on your safety goggles or not have on your hard hat. You got to protect your noggin. You got to protect your eyes. So respect is the way that we protect this process. Some of the other tools that I use a level. We need to remain calm when we're having a disagreement. No one wants to see a crooked picture on the wall. You need to use pliers so you can be turned and be pliable. I use a flashlight so you can focus on the problem. Don't bring up last week if the problem is right now. So that's part of the process and why you had to wear this lovely pink hard hat.
Well, it was, I've got to admit, the first time I did wear the pink hard hat. But I'm really intrigued by your analogy of how we use tools to disagree without being disagreeable, because in many cases, the first step of pure reinvention, which is disruption, suggests that we've somehow thrown a bomb in the middle of the room and we've blown everything up. And what you're talking about is how we take differences of opinion and navigate those ways in a professional manner that respects each person's point of view, but does move us forward to a new place.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because disagreement, when we think disagreement, automatically we think, wow, this is going to blow it up. I call it ziggity boom.
Yep.
But there's a level of disagreement called constructive disagreement.
Exactly.
That's what makes this process of pure reinvention work, that disrupt. If you have that disagreement and you disrupt it, then you have to go back to that next step of ownership. You have to own that disagreement. You have to own the process of trying to resolve it. And what can come out of that disruption, it goes back to the connect, is we can connect people, we can connect processes, we can connect information. And then we go to simplify. Having a disagreement might result in us simplifying a process. And then you go to the move fundamental, and now we have movement in where we're going. It may be movement in our careers. It may be movement in our relationships. It may be movement in a process at work that could improve everything.
Tell me how, Julie, your presentation was received at the ABWA group that you spoke with.
It was received very well, so much so that Sonia invited me to asked me would I be interested in doing a podcast if that opportunity presented itself. And it just continues to show me that with every group or people that I talk to about it, they are really interested in trying to figure out how can I disagree, and we walk away and still, we don't have to be friends, but we can still respect each other.
Julie, do you think this is a book? Now, you mentioned that we're trying to figure out, as if this is kind of a book that's currently being written rather than a book that has been written. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'll go back to when I say that common sense is not so common. This book has been written. All I'm doing is just taking it and presenting it in a different way, because sometimes we learn in a different way. And that's why I use the tool, so you have something to relate to. You can visualize that tool in helping you to get out of that situation that you think you might be in.
So you are really advocating in this common sense approach in connecting a known, a tool, a level.
Yes.
To something, some process that's crooked.
Correct.
And saying if we could put a level to that and make it, straighten it out so that people can connect a known to an unknown.
Absolutely. And I want you to be thinking. I want you to think about what you're doing and what you're saying and about the other person. One part of the presentation talks about disagreement styles, because we all have different types of disagreement styles. If I know what your disagreement style is, then I'll know how to communicate with you in a way that will be productive.
Okay, now I want to stop right there because this is really interesting. Are you saying this is not all about you, but you are going to be paying attention to how I am reacting to the message and then adjusting your style to move me forward?
Absolutely. A disagreement involves two people.
So the role of a leader is to be listening and watching for how the other person is reacting.
Absolutely.
And then making sure they are initiating techniques and strategies to help move that person forward from what that person can connect with.
I can give you an example of that. In doing this, I talked to my dad. My dad is a retired foreman from the city of Detroit, Department of Transportation. And in talking to this, he says, Julie, I can use the example of a perfectionist. A perfectionist is always being perfect and analytical. So when they make a mistake and you go to talk to them about it, wow, yeah, you're grabbing your head. But what he said is, I know they're a perfectionist. And so how I'm going to communicate with them is, you know what? You never make mistakes and you always do a great job, but I know this is an aberration and I know you'll not let it happen again. Guess what? You haven't torn that perfectionist down. You've kept them lifted up. You're letting them know, I appreciate your work. It was just an aberration. I know you won't let it happen again because you're so detail oriented. That whole conversation could have gone in another way if you didn't know what that person's disagreement style is.
So as the leader,
yes,
in that particular scenario, you have to be conscious that you are the navigator of that conversation. However it turns out is under your control.
That's right. You're the skipper.
You are the skipper.
Yes.
Who gets to wear the pink hat?
I get to wear the pink hat.
Oh,
right.
You get to wear the pink hat.
This time we're going to switch and I get to wear the pink hat.
Okay. Now, this work that you're doing on the side is also very connected to the work that you do for your day job.
Very much so. Very much so.
As the case manager to the Honorable Gerald E. Rosen.
And absolutely, part of the whole presentation came about based on the fact he wrote in my review that my interpersonal skills are excellent even when we're bickering. And that's the foundation that I use for this disagreeing without being disagreeable.
And I want you to say that again. My interpersonal
skills are excellent, even when we are bickering.
So you and I could have a fight, and I would still feel as if you cared about me.
Yes, because I'm not fighting dirty. I'm not. It's not a fight. It's a disagreement. We differ. And just because you have a difference of opinion and I have a difference of opinion doesn't mean that it has to turn and go to the dark side. It just means that I acknowledge that difference and you acknowledge my difference.
So instead of saying we're at opposite ends, we're at different ends.
And we're going to come together.
And your goal, even if it's not mine, your goal is to bring us together.
Actively, yes.
Actively engaged, and my sense is not letting up until we resolve.
Well, it's funny when we were talking about the superpower and I asked the judge about what he thought my superpower was. He said unrelenting. That's exactly what he used, right? He used unrelenting. Yes.
Yeah. Persistence is the key, right?
You can't a scared man can't win.
You can't give up.
A scared man can't win. You can't give up. You have to continue, because the foundation of relationships are fluid. You're going to fall in and you're going to fall out. You have to work to have a positive relationship. They just don't happen.
Julie, this has been absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed myself.
Amy, the dilemma we have here is not were there any positive messages in this, but how do we pull all of them out? I know that there were so many for you that we had to kind of sort them through. So go through some of what really struck you in Julie's message.
She just took us back to the basics. Things that we all learned, we all know, but somehow in the course of doing business in the day-to-day, we forget. Common sense needs to be used. Words are gifts and weapons. How and what we say are important to everyone. Uplift versus hurting or demoralizing. And it's so easy just to get angry, get upset, get stressed in the moment. You'd have to get something done for your board to go to your staff and do that.
So the things you just talked about were kind of the things we should have learned in kindergarten.
Absolutely.
And then once we get to a higher level of thought, these are the two things that really struck you deeply.
Absolutely. So Julie, when she talked about constructive disagreement.
Is that an oxymoron?
I had to think. I actually had to stop the podcast and replay it a couple of times because, I had never heard it phrased that way. And what does that mean? But then she went to explain. We need to take ownership of the disagreement, and we actually have to work on solving it.
That, I think, is just amazing.
Absolutely. I think so too. She said you connect with the person that you're disagreeing with the topic that you're disagreeing over, and then you simplify it in order to move the process. I thought it was actually quite brilliant, and things that you just don't think about it that way.
She took something that I think confuses a lot of people due to the emotion. What I heard from your description, Amy, is it's mostly about the intent. If you really wanted to be disagreeable and hurt someone, you could. But that wasn't the intent. The intent is to take two differing points of view and find a way to create a solution. And that is, well, let's just put it very bluntly. How many good leaders do we know that actually can do that well? That's in short supply. And here's Julie that's explaining to us that you can find conflict everywhere. Finding someone who can responsibly, constructively mediate that into a positive outcome makes you pretty special.
Yeah, that's the definition of a leader.
Isn't it?
A couple of other things that she said, and I just thought I had to smile. Common sense is not so common anymore. It's absolutely true. And then another thing that we should know, but we forget, I forgot, we all learn in different ways. And, the example of the pink hat. These are some of the tools that she utilizes.
Right.
And she broke it down into the different tools to show us, this is how you should be looking at things. And this is how other people see what we're saying. They see it very differently than how we think that they should see it.
Yes.
And that brought me to the other point that I thought was very interesting, that people have different disagreement styles.
Not just disagreements, but actual disagreement styles.
Yes.
You're going to have to explain that.
Yes. So again, I had to listen to it again. So people argue differently, and words mean different things to different people. Even your gestures, your facial features, things of that nature, you have to recognize as a leader that styles matter, and how you have to recognize or know the person that you're going to disagree with in order to do it in a constructive way. As Julie said, the role of a leader is to listen and adjust strategies and your techniques to help move the person forward. It's not to win an argument. It is to solve a problem and uplift the person and move the organization forward.
Which, as we've learned, is a real art.
Oh, yes, it's very difficult.
If you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it Pure Reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.